The Marquis's Mistaken Captive. Chapter 1. The Assignment. The Marquis moved through the shadowed corridors of his London townhouse, every sense sharpened by the weight of his mission. Tonight, he would find the elusive spy, or so he believed. Candlelight quivered along walnut panels as Adrien Saint-Evreux, Marquis of Saint-Evreux by inheritance and a government instrument by preference, reread the summons from the Foreign Office. The French agent known as Celeste has entered Kent under an assumed identity. Apprehend her before dawn, immediate action. Burn after reading. Lord Ravensmere's hand was small and decisive, the downstroke at the R, like a blade. Adrien checked the priming on his pistols, set the rapier at his hip, though he preferred silence to steel, and told his men to ready the carriage. Rain met him with an old acquaintance's chill. In the coach, he spread a map of Kent, circling Ashcombe Hall near Canterbury. The whisper was governess, Celeste disguised among children in England. No one saw a governess until she erred. Near 3 a.m, the carriage turned down Ashcombe's Lane, gravel hissing under the wheels. Adrien slipped in by the servants' entrance, past a cat's reproachful stare and a jug smelling faintly of yeast. From a small room near the schoolroom came a breath of song, neither lullaby nor prayer. He paused at the threshold and saw her by the embers, a young woman with loosened hair like a fall of dark honey, brushing it with absent diligence. He stepped in, voice low. "Madam, be very calm. I must ask you to come with me." The brush clattered to the rug. She rose, one hand at her throat, eyes alert even in fear. "Who are you? What?" "A messenger of the government," he said. "You will come with me now, and silently. If you comply, you will not be harmed." She glanced toward the adjoining door, the sleeping children, and said, "I cannot leave." He crossed the space and took her wrist, not cruelly, but with finality. She twisted, reached for the candle. He knocked it aside and it died on the rug. He wrapped his cloak around her, drew up the hood. "Forgive me," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity of it. There is always a breath when the future can turn on one syllable. She might have screamed. The cook might have returned for kindling. Neither happened. He guided her into the corridor and out into rain that stitched the night. In the carriage, she sat opposite him, wrists bound with his silk handkerchief. "Where are you taking me?" "To London. You will be questioned." "Questioned about what?" "A false name, a false history." "I have none of those," she said, steady. "My name is Charlotte Ellison, governess to Sir Matthew and Lady Ashcombe's children, daughter of the Reverend Jonathan Ellison of Windermere. I have letters and references. You might have asked for them before dragging me into a storm." "You have rehearsed your innocence," he answered, because he needed the room to be smaller than his doubt. At the first posting house, he allowed a halt. The innkeeper's wife set broth. Charlotte drank without trembling. "You do not fear me," he said later as they rolled on. "I fear you very much. I simply refuse fear the performance it desires." Near Rochester, a soaked postboy put a docket in Adrien's hand. 2 sentences. Celeste captured near Dover at dawn. Proceed to London. Disregard previous orders. He read it twice, as if repetition might make it less simple. He climbed back into the carriage, loosed the silk at Charlotte's wrists, and said, hoarse, "Miss Ellison, I have committed an egregious wrong. The woman I sought is already taken. I believed you a danger you are not. I beg your forgiveness." "Then turn the horses," she replied, without triumph. "There are children who will wake and wonder what has become of me." They had not yet turned when 8 riders spilled out of a stand of blackthorn like the consequence of many nights' bad decisions. Pistols lifted, "Stand and deliver." "Down," Adrien said, throwing Charlotte to the floorboards as a window shattered. Will fired. A man toppled. Adrien leaned out, aimed, fired, moved powder, wet leather, horse. "At your right," Charlotte cried. He turned into a swing and put his fist into a jaw. The bandits scattered, leaving one horse dead and one robber bleeding into the ruts. Charlotte was with the wounded man before Adrian could stop her, knotting a strip torn from her cloak. "Hold still. Thrashing helps no one." "You risk yourself," Adrian said, and heard the confession in his tone. "I refuse to let him die for the sake of your pride," she answered. "Or mine, and you have enough deaths to remember." They found shelter in an empty farmhouse smelling of damp straw and potatoes. He coaxed a fire. She warmed her hands and watched him with the calm attention of someone measuring truth, he told her, because silence harmed more than speaking, of his brother lost in Spain to intelligence 2 hours late, of the arithmetic of secrecy. "I fear not being wrong," he said. "I fear the lives my wrongness drags with it like chains." "You are not lost," she said. "A man who fears his errors is not in love with them." By noon they reached Ashcombe. Children poured down the steps. Sir Matthew's face was a closed fist. Lady Ashcombe's indignation trembled at the corners with tears. Adrian bowed. "I wronged Miss Ellison. I mistook her for another. She is not harmed, which is more grace than I deserve." "My lady," Charlotte said quietly, a hand on her mistress's sleeve, "he is guilty of haste, not malice. He has acknowledged it, more than most men manage." Lady Ashcombe breathed, and some of her anger uncoupled. Adrian left, because that was proper, and returned, because something more binding than propriety required it. Chapter 2. The Error and Its Consequences. He brought books for the children, a telescope for the boy who loved the moon, a puzzle for the youngest. He wrote his report naming his own failure in Ravensmere's tidy office, unusual, the Undersecretary observed, to receive a confession without a hunt. "Give me instead the person who told us Celeste would be at Ashcombe." "Someone wanted the wrong woman taken," Adrian said. "A clumsy conduit for French designs." Clue arrived on a ribbon. Days later, Charlotte mentioned a travelling seller, Pierre from Rouen, who brought the nurserymaid's cousin a parcel wrapped in a French newspaper. "Extravagant for bread," she said. That afternoon, a blue ribbon appeared on her schoolroom table, neatly knotted. When she warmed it in her hands, it gave off the faint metallic scent of lamp oil. She brought it to Adrian. "Someone believes I am still of interest, or wishes me to be." He turned the ribbon, oil in the knot. "They think my mistake put a mark on you," he said. "They intend to keep it there." The next day, a boy delivered a note to the kitchen. "You were seen with the Marquis. He is not your friend. Meet me by the willow at the mill pond at twilight, alone if you value your safety, or that of the children. No signature." The paper smelled faintly of the same oil. Charlotte took it to Adrian. He disliked the idea of her as bait, and disliked more the idea of leaving the mark on her back. "You will go," he said, "because not going is suspicious. You will not be alone, because I have learned that lesson." Twilight lowered to pond grey. Charlotte stood by the willow, shawl tight, composed. The housekeeper watched from the parsonage hedge, converted to espionage for the price of a new copper pot. Adrian waited behind the miller's shed. Will stood off with a shuttered lantern. A man with a scar arrived, brown coat valuable only for the knife in its lining. He smiled, attempted charm, failed, and produced a child's primer. "See, mademoiselle." He tapped letters pricked with a pin. "C-E-L-E-S-T-E. You are a governess. You can spell. You know the name that is yours." Adrian stepped out. "And you know the name of the person who sent you, or you will learn one in a prison yard." His open palm slapped the primer into the pond. Will's rope took the man's ankles. The ground took his dignity. In the same instant, a second villain emerged with a pistol. He aimed at Charlotte. She bent as if to faint, snatched a handful of stones, and flung them low at his shins. He swore, fired wide. Adrian closed the distance. The pistol belonged to nobody. The second man ran, bleeding and astonished. The first lay bound with the same silk that had marked Charlotte's wrists, a neat irony Adrian did not enjoy. Under questions asked in a tone that discouraged lies, the scarred man gave a name like a curse and a prayer: Celeste. She had ordered the errand, thinking to frighten a governess into running, thinking to herd what she assumed must be prey. He carried a vial of the same oil. "Deptford Docks," the man said at last. "Midnight, behind the Coopers. We fetch what she thinks is hers." Adrian's jaw set. His error had invited a second wrong. He would end both. "One more favour," he said to Charlotte afterward in the quiet of the garden. "Trust me an inch further." "Trust is extended in increments," she replied. "You have earned several." Chapter 3. Celeste's Net. Midnight made the Thames a coin polished by thieves. Men Adrian trusted, too few but careful, took positions around stacks of staves and casks. Charlotte waited in the Marquis's carriage with a pistol she still disliked. "I will use this only if necessary," she said. "I should like the necessity to be small." "It will be," he wished, and shut the door. Celeste came like the answer to a riddle one is not glad to have solved. Low hat, coat to the throat, movement clipped by practice. "You're late," she said, glancing at the bound messenger, and then at Adrian, whom she recognized with the smallest of flickers. "And not the man I sent for." "You never are," he replied. He said her name aloud, because names sometimes change weather. "Celeste." She did not nod. She did not need to. "You work too slowly, my lord. While you were playing at Ashcombe, I removed what I wanted from London." "The pouch you stole was meant to be stolen," he answered, watching her face as the truth found purchase. "The letters we care about remained in the one you left." Anger flashed, not at being outwitted, but at having to admit it. "You made a second error. You used an innocent as bait." "Your country's innocence is a story you sell yourselves," she said in careful English. "I do not kill children. I do not kidnap governesses in the night." "I did," he said, "because the only redemption for a lie is a confession." You, however, sharpened the blade I had already put to her throat. "Tell me where our missing courier is, and I will argue against a rope." "You bargain on credit," she murmured, bitterly amused. She moved, quick, trained. But Will's rope remembered ankles. She hit the staves with a curse that made a dockman cross himself. Steel flickered. Men moved. The fight was short and honest. When she understood the arithmetic, she laughed once. "You never fail neatly," she said. "He is alive, for now. Warehouse with shutters like scars on Limehouse Reach. Lower floor. He does not stand much. They did not pay for a tall cage." By dawn the shutters had been found, the cage broken, and a red-haired courier, voice scraped but living, lifted into light like a letter rescued from a fire. Celeste went to Ravensmere's men with an escort that did not trust walls. Adrian asked for leniency on any charge that did not end at a rope. He did not know if he had that influence. He knew only that a man must try to use what he is given for mercy, or admit his virtues are uniforms. He returned to Kent bearing the river's cold and a courier's unexpected gratitude. Charlotte knelt among cabbages in Ashcombe's garden, her trowel grimed, the lilacs forgiving the rain. "You have brought London on your boots," she said, smiling. "Shake it off, or the spinach will learn bad habits." He told her enough. The docks, the warehouse, the man alive because the world had hesitated to be entirely cruel. She listened without flattery or judgment, then turned her palm up to his. The hand showed a thin white line where a slate had once scraped it, a small callus where scissors rested. He spoke before caution could rehearse him back into silence. "Miss Ellison, I came first to make amends. Then I learned I wished to do more than mend what I had broken. I wished to make something with you that the world cannot ruin without ruining itself." "You want to marry me," Because you are ashamed, she said. Because the uglier possibility must be admitted, or it becomes a ghost that walks between two people without manners. I want to marry you, because I was ashamed and learned from it, he replied. And because when you told me I was wrong, I believed you, something I do with few living souls. You will not use children for intelligence, she said, fierce as a schoolroom rule. I will not. You will tell me when you ride out at midnight, and why, and what you are afraid of. I will tell you before I am afraid. You will come to Windermere and ask properly, she concluded, mouth softening, with all honesty. Chapter 4. Redemption. The vicarage at Windermere sat whitewashed behind hydrangeas that had given up on modesty. The Reverend Jonathan Ellison had eyes that found out small lies without needing the big ones. He shook Adrian's hand and listened to a version of events that spared no one. You tied my daughter with silk, he said, and then untied yourself with truth I cannot promise you are wise, but I accept that you are trying. Charlotte's mother, quick-eyed and warm, kissed her daughter and then held Adrian's hand longer than etiquette required. You brought her back, she said. Then you returned for her. That is the order that pleases a mother. They married in the small church near Ashcombe, where beeswax sweetened the stone and the sexton hummed without admitting it. Lady Ashcombe wept into a handkerchief embroidered with violets. Sir Matthew polished his spectacles. Lord Ravensmere stood at the back and looked for once, almost tender. Will wiped his eyes among the grooms and loudly offered to fight anyone who laughed. When the vicar asked if the Marquis would have this woman to wife, Adrian answered with the certainty of a man delivering the one dispatch that made sense because it was spoken aloud. I will. After bells and cake and speeches edited by wives under tables, after children threw lavender that made the air clean, they stepped into the carriage as if it were a beginning rather than an exit. You realise, Charlotte said, laughter in her voice, that every governess in England is now scandalously deceived as to her chances of being carried off by a Marquis and returned as a bride. I shall write to the Home Office at once, he replied gravely. We must nip the practice in the bud. He lifted her gloved hand and kissed the kid leather, an ordinary gesture made new by the labour it had taken to arrive at it. You taught me, he said, that a man may be wrong and yet worth saving. And you taught me, she answered, that a mistake may be a door, if one has the wit to open it rather than brace it shut. He kept his promises. There were nights when messages came and he rode out, leaving the bed warm, returning with explanations as well as fatigue. There were afternoons when Charlotte measured muslin and justice in equal lengths. Tests arrived and passed, a letter with a pressed flower that wished to be poison, a rumour that ran ahead and arrived breathless, a politician who tried to make Charlotte a parlour anecdote and was discouraged from repeating the attempt. There were consolations, a rescued courier bringing news with tears he had not meant to shed, a child tracing letters with a sure finger because a governess insisted that certainty matters most when the world is inexplicable. There were quarrels resolved where they began. In the habit of honesty, they both chose to practice without rank. If the Marquis sometimes woke to the farmhouse fire in memory and heard again the quiet command begin with honesty, he did not resent the admonition he had made it his creed. If Charlotte sometimes stood in a doorway at midnight and listened for hoofbeats, she did so with understanding rather than grievance. The pistol she disliked kept clean. When they visited Windermere in their second spring, the Reverend Ellison asked whether serving a country that tells lies had made Adrian narrower or wider. He considered the gate, the hydrangeas, the way Charlotte's head tilted when she listened. Both, he said. But I married the person who keeps me honest about which I am being. The bells of Ashcombe rang one June afternoon for no reason at all, because a boy found the rope and wanted to be a cause. Their music travelled over hedges and into a room where a Marquis kissed his wife with the unhurried certainty of a man who had learned that victory can look like a quiet life. If asked years later when they first knew they belonged to each other, he would say it was when she accused him of righteousness without mercy. She would say it was when he apologized without ornament. Between those answers lay a marriage, made from a mistake faced, a truth chosen, and a love practiced in ordinary light. The end. If you've enjoyed this story of love, redemption, and quiet courage, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, so you'll be the first to hear our next Regency romance on the Regency Gazette channel. Thank you for listening.